Great. Let's get started. So very happy to introduce our next speaker, David Harwath. David is a professor at UC Austin, where he leads the speech, audio, and language technologies lab. He's been working on language in multiple modalities and with multiple modalities for a very long time. He did some of the earliest work on learning speech models from grounded data, speech with video, which is work that I very much admire, and that got him the George Sproul's Best PhD Dissertation Award at MIT. David is also my academic little brother, and I've been following his work for a long time. He is the winner of an NSF Career Award, an ASRD nomination, as well as this award, and he hails from Illinois, so I guess this is his homecoming, and very excited to have him. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Karen, for such a wonderful introduction and for also organizing this amazing workshop, which has been so much fun. So, I don't want to spend too much time in the introduction of my talk reintroducing, all the ideas behind speech elements that we've been really talking about a lot. We've seen so many different capabilities and tasks that these models can be applied to, where they can take speech and or text as input and output speech and or text, from speech recognition to synthesis, conversational dialogue, translation, audio captioning, emotion recognition, and so on and so forth. So the perspective that, I kind of want to add to the discussion in my talk today is that some tasks that we care about are going to require more than just thinking about joint speech and text models, right? So one example might be video dubbing, where you can think of it as like a text-to-speech or maybe even a speech-to-speech translation problem if you're dubbing from one language to another, where the generated speech has to be temporally synchronized with the video of a talker's facial movements and movements and all of that. So to do that properly, you would need the video frames themselves as an additional input to the model. So the themes of all the work from my lab that I want to present today, it's all revolving really around specifying new tasks that we can extend these speech language models to handle, especially where we need to add new modalities aside from just speech and text, or maybe single channel audio to think about like multi-channel audio. We want to curate new data sets that are going to support these tasks and enable models to both train to solve those tasks, but also to benchmark models for those tasks. And sometimes that's also going to entail creating new model architectures, new encoders, new tokenizers for new modalities, new loss functions to adapt existing elements to these tasks. And of course, we have a culture of just open sourcing everything in our lab, so there's going to be links covered throughout the talk for you to be able to just take I don't really do QR codes. I'm kind of old school. I like to just type in URLs. So you can just snap a picture of the URL and you can find code, data, checkpoints, and all of that. So there's three parts to the presentation that I'm going to give today. The first part is going to be talking about neural codec language models for both speech editing rather than just generation, as well as video dubbing. The second part, I'm going to talk about adding spatial sound perception ability to these audio text language models. So, we have two ears and we can hear not only like what's going on in terms of the semantics, so we hear somebody talking or a glass breaking or, something like that, but we can also understand how far away the sounds are, what direction they're coming from, what's the physical geometric relationship between one sound and another sound that I'm hearing at the same time. So I'm going to talk about how we can enable these models to actually perform tasks related to that. And then the third part, if time permits, I moved this actually to the end because I was originally going to talk about it, but Anuj, the student that led this work, actually gave a lightning talk yesterday on scaling up style-controlled text-to-speech synthesis. So I don't want to repeat too much of the things that he's already covered. But if there's time, then I will at least be able to maybe play some additional demos and just kind of give another shout out to the data in case anybody missed it yesterday. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is our model VoiceCraft, zero-shot speech editing and text-to-speech in the wild. This is work led by my former now PhD student who just graduated earlier this year, Puyon Peng. He's now at Meta, but he led all of this work. This model, I believe, was the first large-scale open source neural codec language model for doing synthesis and voice cloning. And so, when we put it up on GitHub, it was kind of a big deal and got over 8,000 stars within just a couple of weeks. So I want to first talk about what the voice cloning text-to-speech synthesis problem is. It's pretty simple. Given a short reference recording, say 3 to 5 seconds of somebody talking, what you want to do is you want to use that as like an enrollment utterance or an example to give to the model as an input along with some new words that we want to synthesize. And so the model should essentially clone the voice that's in that example utterance. And so I'll play an example of that. First, here's the reference recording.
Like this is one sketch we did that was about the...
So that's Dave Chappelle, and if we want to then synthesize some new speech in that voice, we would just give the model some additional text and then out would come this.
I don't want to make it as a thing where I'm absolving myself of any responsibility.
So in addition to the characteristics of the speaker, we generally also want to clone the other audio characteristics that are present, such as background noise or channel characteristics, in addition to like the prosody and the emotion and the speaking style that was expressed in the input reference speech. So, early, we were not the first to look at this problem. We heard about work yesterday on audio LM and Volley. These were early neural codec language models that cast this voice cloning text-to-speech synthesis problem as a sequence continuation problem using these audio tokens. But early on, these models were closed source. And so, we couldn't really, retrain them or look into what they're doing. They also couldn't generalize to other tasks outside of the sort of sequence continuation task they were trained on. So they weren't capable of doing things like speech editing. So we said, okay, let's make an open source model and let's try to also, extend it to some additional tasks, such as speech editing. So what is the speech editing problem? It's similar to the voice cloning TTS problem, where we're given some kind of input speech waveform, but rather than just clone the vocal characteristics of that waveform, we actually want to change some of the words that were spoken. So maybe, I think a really compelling, easy to understand kind of use case here would be like if you're a voice actor recording lines for a movie and you mispronounce a name or a word, and you don't want to have to go back and re-record the whole line. So maybe you can just change a couple of words here and there by just editing the text transcript in order to actually synthesize the replacement speech in your voice with the appropriate affect and everything. So I'll play an example. This is this waveform down on the bottom.
It was a glance of inquiry, ending in a look of chagrin, with some muttered phrases that rendered it more emphatic.
So let's say I wanted to change the words glance of inquiry, ending in a look of chagrin, to look of disgust, followed by a curled lip. But again, I want to preserve the speaking characteristics, or the vocal characteristics of the speaker, but also things like the accent and the speaking rate, prosody, and all of that. And so the model would produce something like this.
It was a look of disgust, followed by a curled lip, with some muttered phrases that rendered it more emphatic.
One more thing I want to mention is that, this is a very distinct problem from TTS because when you're inpainting the sequence, the speech that you generate, it has to flow naturally into and out of the surrounding context, right? So you can't just, use an off-the-shelf TTS model and then, kind of like splice that audio in because it's going to sound very unnatural and discontinuous and there's going to be artifacts. So what that means is that naive autoregressive left to right prediction isn't really going to work for this task because you can only condition on the left path context and not the future right context. So one of the the innovations that we had to adopt in order to solve this problem was to, we actually took inspiration from the CM3 paper, which basically develops this sequence rearrangements technique, where we say, okay, well, if there's a span of the speech that we want to edit in the middle, then what we're going to do is we're going to find which of the audio tokens correspond to the speech that we want to edit, the words that we want to change. And what we're going to do is we're going to move them to the very end of the sequence, and we're going to replace them with this special mask token. So basically, we tell the model, okay, there's something missing right here, but you still get to read the left context, and then there's a blank, and then you read the right context, and then we tell the model, okay, now it's the end of the utterance, now we're going to echo back the mask token which you missed, and that's your prompt to go in and infill the missing speech there. And then, in doing so, the model's able to condition both in the past and the future, and then generate the infilled span all within this kind of normal left to right autoregressive modeling framework. And then at the end, if you want to resynthesize this, you just have to kind of undo this rearrangement. So just to give you some additional technical details, I have just a couple of slides where I want to talk about that. In practice, things are even more complicated because and I'm sure everybody here is already familiar with the fact that most of our speech tokenizers, they don't produce just one single token. We usually get an array of parallel tokens because we're using residual vector quantization. So we have to do all the bookkeeping associated with that. And then we do the causal masking, and then there's additional techniques that have been shown in other papers to improve the predictability of these parallel tokens, like by applying this delayed stacking pattern. So when you start combining all these tricks together, it actually does get to be quite complicated. But at the end of the day, we're just training a transformer decoder model where we essentially concatenate phoneme transcripts with this crazy rearranged stack of codec tokens, and then trying to predict the next tokens that are coming up. Just to give you a few more training details in case you're curious here, key to getting this model to work was scaling up to on the order of tens of thousands of hours of speech data. We really didn't see these models start to perform well and generate naturalistic speech until we started training them on sort of 5,000 hours minimum. With the 10,000 hours of GigaSpeech, because we wanted them to be very domain general, be able to handle a wide range of audio, so clean audiobooks, and then very messy YouTube and podcast data. Another tip is that we actually found it really advantageous to retrain our own encodec model from scratch on the same data rather than use it off the shelf. Not only did we get better reconstruction quality when the model matched the tokenizer matched the data, the in-domain data we were using for testing, but we could also make a lot of optimizations to make training easier on our limited compute budget. So for example, we were able to reduce the frame rate from 75 to 50 hertz. We were able to reduce the number of code books from 16 down to 4, so we don't have to predict as many parallel tokens. In doing so, we still had to adjust the size of the code books themselves and make them a little bit larger. But at the end of the day, after making these optimizations, we were able to get training of the encodec model down to taking only a little over 2 weeks, but on 4 NVIDIA A40 GPUs. And then for the Transformer LM, this is an 830 million parameter model. We train it for a similar amount of time on the same hardware. And a really cool thing here is that even though we're trained to do the speech editing task, we can basically cast it as a mass reconstruction task. So we don't need to have paired data where, here's a waveform, with the original waveform, and then here's some other waveform which was edited to reflect some different content. We can basically just randomly mask spans of speech and treat that as the edit, and then use the ground truth text as the intended edit and reconstruct that speech. And another cool lesson we learned here is that even though the desired use case of editing is generally going to be doing this in painting on segments that are aligned with word boundaries, you don't have to worry about any of that training. You can actually just use completely random masks, and the model still works really well. So, you don't have to do force alignment of your training data, which can get pretty expensive when it's this large. In inference time, you do need to use forced alignment, to get the per word start and timestamps, if you want to replace, picked with plugged, for example. But after you do that, you basically would just mask out those tokens associated with the word you want to change, replace them with a special token, and then give the left and right context along with the desired words to the model, and then it would generate the full speech here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about evaluation now. I think my favorite evaluations that we did here were actually the side-by-side naturalness preference comparisons between natural speech and edited speech. We essentially told human raters, okay, here's two pieces of speech, right? Rate which one you think is more natural. We didn't tell them that they were edited. We didn't tell them which one was model produced or anything like that. And in general, VoiceCraft generated or edited speech was rated as equally natural or more natural than real speech, more than half. Which is, it's very cool, but also a little bit scary. Of course, we can also use the model to do voice cloning PTS, where we essentially just treat sequence continuation as an insertion edit at the end of your original utterance, right? So now you can do voice cloning TTS as well. And when we released this model at the time, it was achieving state-of-the-art results in terms of intelligibility, naturalness, and speaker similarity, mean opinion scores over the competing models that were out around the same time. So I just want to play a couple of quick demos. I'm only going to play one or two. If there's time at the end, we can come back and do more. I'm going to first play the original text on the left, and then I'll play the edited version.
Fast cars, that had the nice clothes, that had the money, they was criminals. Fast cars, that had the nice clothes, that had expensive gold watches, that had the money, they was criminals.
I already played the second one, so I won't skip that. But now I want to play another example that has yet another accent, but also, first one had yet another accent. The third one has interesting background noise, and the model's actually able to in-paint and copy the background noise from the context.
That's a bomb, and that's a good sign from him. Got fully extended on it, knew it as soon as that ball left. That's a bomb, and that's a good sign from him. He clearly signaled and made the play happen as soon as that ball left.
Okay, I'm going to skip the voice cloning TTS demos for now. We can come back to that later on. Now what I want to talk about is some more recent work, which was done by Sungmin Kim, who was a visiting PhD student in my lab. And this is essentially turning VoiceCraft into a multimodal model for the purpose of doing video dubbing. So what is the video dubbing problem? Well, given a silent video of a talker's face and a target transcription, you want, as well as a reference recording of the voice that you want to clone, you want to generate speech, which is now going to be temporally aligned with the video of the talker. So their lip movements, maybe facial expressions, should be matched with the speech that you generate. So this has historically been a very, very difficult problem. Largely due to the fact that the kinds of data sets that we have for this task are pretty small, especially compared to the size of the data sets that we use for ASR or TTS training, right? So you look at LRS2, LRS3, and they're sort of on the order of hundreds to like 1,000 hours of aligned speech and video data, whereas data sets like GigaSpeech and Amelia, which are speech only and don't have video. These are on the order for like 10,000 to 100,000 hours of speech. So we're really kind of data impoverished in this domain. And so the idea is that what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, let's address that by using a speech text language model as our initialization, as our backbone, which we can pre-train on audio and text data, but then we're going to add the capability to take video as an additional input. And hopefully the model will have already learned how to do high quality synthesis, and it basically just needs to learn how to now do that synthesis in synchronization with the video input. Skip this slide here. So the model architecture that we use, it's very, very similar to the VoiceCraft model, which I just talked about. because the idea is that we're mostly initializing the parameters from that model, but what we are going to be adding is this additional video frame input of the talker, and we're going to need to basically build a special purpose encoder to encode those video frames, and we found it was actually advantageous to fuse them with the audio that we're actually generating. So like rather than put all the video frames just concatenated with the phonymized text up front and say, okay, it's the job of the attention mechanism to figure out how to synchronize the speech. We actually found that it worked better if you essentially feed the video frames into the model synchronously and fuse them with the previous generations. So as I mentioned, we're going to use the pre-trained VoiceCraft model as a backbone here, trained on 10,000 hours of speech from GigaSpeech. And we are going to also adapt some lip and face encoders as modules within the AV Fusion layer here, which are also all pre-trained. So looking at the human evaluation on LRS3 in terms of MOS, broken down across 5 different perceptual categories: naturalness, intelligibility, synchronization, expressiveness, and speaker similarity. We found that our model comes, again, pretty close to the ground truth blue bars with the state-of-the-art baselines we were comparing to at the time. The orange and the gray bars, falling quite far behind. That's due, like I said, in most part to the fact that these other models were only training on a couple hundred hours of aligned audio and video data, and not really leveraging like a backbone speech text on. So now I want to play some demos. First, I'm going to just play the ground truth video, and then I'll show how we redubbed it.
It's finding your own voice, where your own voice sits naturally and stably and healthily. It's finding your own voice, where your own voice sits naturally and stably and healthily.
Squarespace makes it incredibly simple to create beautiful websites with their all-in-one platform. Squarespace makes it incredibly simple to create beautiful websites with their all-in-one platform.
Another really cool thing that you can do with this model is you can hold the video input constant, but then change the audio prompts that you give the model, so you can actually then change the voice that you're using to do the dubbing.
It turns out that we were doing a lot of low-level drug cases on the streets just around the corner from our office in
It turns out that we were doing a lot of low-level drug cases on the streets just around the corner from our office in
It turns out that we were doing a lot of low-level drug cases on the streets just around the corner from our office in
It turns out that we were doing a lot of low-level drug cases on the streets just around the corner from our office in Trenton.
Okay, so now I want to move on to a different topic, which is talking about moving into sort of the realm of spatialized sound and thinking about these models as not just handling monaural audio input, but actually taking microphone array input. And so this is work which is led by Zhisheng Zheng, who's a PhD student of mine. He's here somewhere in the audience right there. And this is published at ICML 2024. So, I think we all intuitively know sound is a spatial phenomenon. Most of the time, a lot of the tasks that we look at, speech and audio processing, we only look at monaural sound because it's very, very easy to get data. And a lot of times, you don't really need spatialized or multi-microphone audio to solve the tasks that you're looking at, like speech recognition or speaker ID. But obviously, in the physical world, we do experience sound as a spatialized phenomenon. We can understand not only what sounds are going on, understand the speech that somebody's saying, but we can also perceive like how far away a sound is or somebody that we're talking to, what direction the sound is coming from. And to do that, we generally require multi-channel audio, either in the form of like stereo or multi-microphone array or ambisonic audio. So I think that this is a super exciting research direction because it opens the door to a really huge number of additional applications, especially when we're thinking about embodied agents, which could be running these kinds of speech text language models. So obviously things like robotics would heavily benefit from being able to understand the spatial aspects of sound. Autonomous vehicles that need to know which direction an emergency vehicle siren is coming from. An application I really want to build is some AR or VR glasses for deaf users, where if you're walking down the street and there's a bicycle coming behind you and it's ringing its bell, expecting you to pass or to move out of its way, but they don't know that you're deaf and you can't hear them. Well, maybe you could have some glasses that could actually pop up an alert on the screen and tell you, oh, there's a bicycle, 20 feet behind you, and you need to move to the right or something, kind of like that. So the way that we're going to address this is we're going to try to unify perception and reasoning about spatialized sounds through the lens of question answering. So we built a new data set of 800,000 spatial sound question and answer triplets, which is, of course, open source. We proposed a new model that also extends longitude to process this kind of spatialized audio input. So the main challenge, I would say, with this work was constructing this kind of spatialized audio data. And there's a lot of work which has been coming out of the computer vision domain, which there's a community of people, multiple researchers also coming from vision and moving into sound. And one of the amazing contributions that group of people has come up with is taking these 3D simulators, such as like Matterport 3D, which can be used to do tasks like vision and language navigation, but adding sound rendering to these environments. So essentially, what you can do is from these 3D scans of buildings, you can build a mesh and put textures on it. And it almost looks kind of like a video game environment that you can move through. But what's really cool is you can attach, material types to different walls and surfaces and objects that have different coefficients of sound absorption and reflection and transmission, which are all frequency dependent. And then you can basically do physics-based, ray tracing, to model how the sound propagates within environments and reverberates across walls and things like that. So we can arbitrarily place sound sources and receivers with arbitrary microphone configurations within these environments. And then we can, pop in audio set recordings or whatever you like, and we can basically render them within these spatialized environments, along with things like head-level transfer functions. So we're going to keep things pretty simple. We're not going too crazy here in terms of modeling like second-order ambisonics or really complex microphone arrays. We said let's just see if we can do this, at first with binaural left right with an HRTF kind of model how theaters would do. How much time do I have left?
There's 2 minutes, including questions.
Okay, great. So now what I want to talk about is now that we have this ability to render these spatialized sounds, how do we kind of marry that to some kind of question answer data set, which is going to allow us to to sort of get at like the not only the semantic but also the geometric and spatial relationships between the sounds that we hear in the environment. So what we did is we started by handcrafting a bunch of question templates, which we partitioned into 4 different categories depending upon what the focus of those questions were. So the first one is basically geared towards sound event detection. So what sound events did you hear? Did you hear a dog barking? Did you hear a person talking? The next category has to do with the direction of arrival of the sound. So what direction did the sound come from? The third category has to do with distance estimation. How far away is the sound of the blank? And then the fourth category is multi-source geometric reasoning. So is the sound of the blank to the blank of the sound of the blank, right? Where you can kind of fill in, is the sound of the television to the left of the sound of the smoke alarm or something like that, right? The way that we create our data set then is that given one of these templates, we randomly then select a whole bunch of acoustic scene parameters within our rendering system. So we'll sample one of the environments. There's on the order of hundreds of different, they're basically mansions that have been like 3D photo scanned. And so each of these mansions has a large number of rooms within it. So we'll sample an environment, we'll sample a room, and then we'll randomly place the locations of the sources. Within that room, we'll randomly place the location and pose of the receiver, and then we'll randomly choose a sound event class from a data set of very diverse sound events like audio set, and then drop those down to the sources and then render the sound as it was received by the listener. Given the XYZ coordinates and one of those sound class labels for each source, as well as the XYZ coordinates and the pose parameters of the receiver, we kind of have all the ground truth information about where everything is in the scene and where the receiver is. So we render the binaural plus HRTF sound, and then we basically use some rules to take these parameters and essentially fill in the blanks in the template. So is the sound of the television coming from behind you, based upon the geometric relationships between the receiver and the location of the television, then we can predict, not predict, but derive the ground truth answer, yes. In this case, the person is standing in front of the television facing away from it, so therefore the television is behind them. And then finally, we paraphrase these questions to kind of move them away from the original templatized format with GPT 3.5. Yes, question?
So I wanted to ask, for each rendering, how do you use what coordinate do you use as your 0, point? So we have the rendering right now. How do you determine 0, point?
I believe we should ask Zhisheng. Is 0, 0, 0 the location of the receiver?
No. It's a relatively location. It's not 0, 0, 0. It's a random location inside the space. You can always calculate the relative direction of the receiver and the sound source. Does that make sense?
Right. But is there any do you use any kind of rule to fix where the 0, 0, 0 origin is? Or
yes. So the mesh the mesh I use, it has, for each mesh room I use, it has 0, 0, 0.
Okay.
So it's fixed.
Okay. So the answer is that each mesh already has an origin, basically set. But like Zhisheng said, what matters really is the relative difference in location, not the absolute. Okay. Like I mentioned, we generate a large number of these triples, 800,000 to be specific, of which we reserve 73,000 for testing. And rather than just read through these, I want to just play an example or two. I don't think we have stereo sounding here. Maybe not. I'll play one that doesn't need stereo. Instead, there's other cues that you can use. So in this case, you can listen to the audio. And so the question is the sound of the thunder further from you than the sound of the bell, right? And hopefully you should be able to use, relative volume differences to figure this out. So the answer would be yes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how we can add the capability to actually process this kind of spatialized multi-channel audio to, we're starting, in this case, just from text LLM. We've got some kind of sound input here. It's going to have multiple audio channels. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to tokenize it in some way that the embeddings that come out from that capture both the semantics, but also the spatial information of each source that's present within the scene. And we concatenate that, with the representation of the text for the question, what's the sound on the left side of the barking dog, such that when the LLM processes all of this together, it should be able to produce, correct output, such as exciting music. So we developed a new encoder for this purpose. Based upon the audio spectrogram transformer, we basically built a spatialized version of it. And we found that it was essential to pre-train this encoder on separate tasks before plugging it in. It's harder to essentially end-to-end train your encoder while you're trying to adapt the backbone itself. So we actually pre-trained this to do just classic sound event localization and detection tasks with these CLS tokens here. So we essentially had one CLS token, which is for sound event classification, one for predicting the direction of arrival, and one for predicting distance. And we had to make some more additional modifications to the AST architecture. Normally this model takes in just like a long-mill filter bank spectrogram, but we've got multiple channels and there's information about spatial relationships within the phase. So we end up doing IPD and stacking that with the left and right spectrograms before patch embedding all of those together. So the full BAT model is basically the spatial AST encoder, followed by a projection layer, and then we were just using the Llama 2 model and only training the adapters. And so I'm not going to spend too much time going through boring numbers. I'm going to try and leave a little bit of time for questions, maybe cover Anuj's work just a little bit. But basically, what we found is that we can do pretty well on this benchmark. I mean, I think it's a relatively easy and simple and straightforward, question answering benchmark. We're trying to kind of, build the simplest possible data set and benchmark to show that, like, okay, yes, this is possible to do, and maybe we should think about building more complex data sets here. But essentially, we're able to get pretty good, pretty strong performance. Especially on tasks like reasoning, in terms of like how far away different sources are from one another. 84% accuracy, where random guessing is 50% because these are all just yes/no questions. And also to verify the integrity of the data, we also did an Oracle experiment where the model doesn't have access to the audio. Instead, we just give it like a essentially linearized JSON format of like all the rendering parameters. So it's got all the X, Y, Z's, pitch, azimuth roles of the sources. And then we say, okay, can you answer the questions accurately based upon that? And essentially you get 100% accuracy. Yes. Okay. All right. So very, very quickly, I'm just going to do a really, really quick, a refresh of Anuj's work. Since he presented it yesterday, he's also here in the audience. He's a PhD student working with me and did this really, really, really exciting EMNLP 2025 paper on scaling style-prompted text-to-speech data sets. So, I talked a bit about voice cloning TTS earlier in this talk, but there's other cases where you don't want to clone somebody's voice, and instead you actually want to use like a textual description of what they sound like. And there's been quite a lot of work. We heard some work yesterday on this topic of building data sets where we've got not only speech and transcriptions, but also some kind of style prompt or caption about what this person sounds like. But the open source data sets that were available for this task were pretty limited in one or more dimensions. So either they were pretty rich in terms of how they were captioning the speech, but if they were rich, they were very, very small. Or if they were very, very large, then they were pretty basic in terms of the kinds of terms that they would capture. They would mostly just look at things like that were easily extractable, with signal processing tools like pitch or speaking rate or things like that. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to scale something up, to thousands of hours of speech, where we have not just these more what we're calling them basic. In terms of easily extracted with DSP techniques, speaking rate, fast, slow, pitch, high, low pitch, but also things that are more subjective that you really need humans to annotate. So, does this person have a booming or a soft voice? Do they have a flowing or a sing-song kind of rhythm or a silky or a husky texture to the voice? And then we also divide this taxonomy in terms of whether we need to do this annotation at the speaker level or the utterance level. So there's been a lot of work going back a long time in trying to build taxonomies for speaking styles, but we came up with our own here because we wanted to really build something which was scale centric, which would inform how we were going to be scaling up the data. I'm not going to go over the details. Anuj talked about this yesterday. Scaling up the data. I'm going to also skip the style tag breakdown. I instead just want to go and play a few more demos because we didn't have too much time to do that yesterday. So here's a man speaking with a booming, medium-pitched voice in a clear environment, delivering his words at measured speed.
That's my brother. I do agree, though, it wasn't very well groomed.
A low-pitched, guttural male voice speaks slowly in a clear environment.
You want to see how far you push everything, and as an artist.
Here's a female speaker's voice that is clear and expressed in a measured pace, but carries a high-pitched nasal tone.
Joe Bowell, hockey mom from Wasilla, if I have an idea that would perhaps make...
Here's a frightened woman speaking with a clear and distinct voice.
Yes, that's what they said. I don't know what you're getting done. What are you getting done? Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I think I'm just about out of time. So I just want to highlight again, if you're interested in any of this work in terms of the data that we curated or the models, and you'd like to work with that, please just snap a photo of these links, and I'm happy to take any questions in whatever time remains.
Time for one quick question.
Quick question. So maybe we can take one quick question. I already asked some questions to on the scale 1 paper, and I'm wondering because when you annotate the speech for subject measurement, sometimes when humans do measurement, they make a decision relatively. Like maybe I saw some samples in that scale, but when I saw another, I might make different decision. Do you have some strategies to deal with such scale things?
Do you mean for the style annotations?
Yes, the annotations.
Yeah, so we basically we have a lot of quality control that we do. But a lot of the times what that kind of boils down to is you have to have multiple annotators, and you have to look at firms where there's a high inter-annotator agreement. And you basically filter out things where like only 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 5 people gave it that tag. And you essentially have more confidence in tags that you saw multiple people consistently annotating for a particular speaker or a particular audience.
So the diversity of distribution is not that diversity. When you build out those outline annotation, do you see an interesting thing on human annotations, or is that okay too?
Well, I mean, one interesting that you see, which it's not clear, like, is this because because of a particular distribution, zipping distribution in terms of like the frequency of these tags, or is it more just like how the raters are more likely to assign one tag versus another? But we definitely see that like there's a very, very uneven distribution in terms of the frequencies of these style tags. So yeah, I think that coming up with better ways to get to get data for these rare kind of speaking styles or tags is something that we haven't figured out quite yet.
Okay, thanks again.